Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about the review copy I received of Studio Devespresso's high school-centric survival horror, The Coma, Recut. Find out if I thought this remake was sharp in its presentation, or if this supernatural slasher missed the point. The Coma follows the story of high school student Young Ho, whose life is being plagued by the hellish trifecta of bogus bullies, bleak dreams, and bad grades. It's no wonder, then, that he finds himself succumbing to exhaustion on exam day. Unfortunately, it's not just academic failure he has to worry about, because when Young Ho next opens his eyes, his surroundings seem off. The school looms large around him, dark and desolate, and he's now left trying to find his way out, yet nothing is as it seems in this place. Especially in the case of the uncanny stalker that lurks in shadowed halls. Anyways, that, sums up the whole moody synopsis of this game, so, let's get into how it boiled down. And, TLDR, there is a reason I began to call the protagonist Dumb Ho throughout my playthrough of the game. See, the Coma's riddled with both collectible and ambient notes that you can read. While some of these do serve to flesh out the game's world and provide insight into the various characters, the protagonist doesn't ever really act on the information contained within them, which essentially leads to some serious instances of story and gameplay segregation, because even when they foreshadow or outright spoil upcoming plot reveals, the protagonist remains utterly oblivious about it in dialogues with those characters. It's, a little frustrating, honestly. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the narrative or the setting. There's a lot to enjoy in the side narrative elements, the lore and everything that complements the story. But the idea of discovering these plot tidbits and then ignoring them raised my hackles. What's more, whilst there are a handful of different endings, the way to getting the best one is a little bit obtuse. Enough so that even after getting some post-game hints, I still failed to get it.
Remind yourself that overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer.
Folks, I overlooked a small step that I am still unsure of, went past the point of no return, and saved. Honestly, there's a decent bit of time that passes before you'll even find out if you messed up or not, and there was no way I was going to redo the entirety of the game just to find out what that step was. Still, that's not to say I didn't enjoy aspects of the gameplay. Like I said in the intro, the Coma Recut is a survival horror style game, albeit with a large emphasis on stealth. Mainly, you'll be guiding Young Ho around the school, rummaging around through the classes in search of supplies to keep yourself afloat, and key items to open up more of the school. But this process is complicated by the supernatural stalker which haunts the halls, and your complete inability to fight back. Instead, you're tasked with doing your best to avoid or hide from them, something which the game's sound design does its best to enable by virtue of some altogether ominous heel clicks which accompany your adversary's advance. Mechanically speaking, the hiding isn't too bad in and of itself, as all you need to do is find a bathroom stall or cupboard to dive into in order to wait out the killer. Unfortunately, as you progress forward, the game does begin to throw a lot of locked or useless hiding spots at you, just to fuck with you and waste time as the monstrous Miss Song closes in. Still, there is a third option for hiding. So long as you're willing to plunge the already dark halls into utter obscurity by turning off your flashlight, you can crouch down and hold your breath. This can work in a pinch, but only as long as the killer doesn't see you do it. And since she has a solid visual range, you typically need to do it well in advance. Since you're both immobile and losing stamina with every passing second you're like that, it makes for some tense and desperate moments, especially since it can effectively leave you with no stamina to run away or dodge her murderous attacks if things go awry. And then this is further compounded by her ability to fake you out by leaving an area and then dropping back in a moment later. More of a tactic she'll use later in the game, but it's still a bitch move. That all said, sometimes you just don't have the option of hiding. Perhaps you rounded a flight of stairs and landed directly in front of the killer, or were caught flat-footed in a scripted sequence. Or maybe she just decided to obsessively lurk directly outside the room I wound up in and wouldn't leave even after I wandered off to make coffee. Whichever. Cue the obligatory chase scenes, and goddammit are these fraught, though not only due to her murderous persistence. Oh no, our academically inclined antagonist here also makes a habit of warping ahead of you at times, essentially punishing you if you manage to get a large enough lead on her by quickly switching floors and rooms. Not only does this lead to some bullshit jump scares, it also tends to obliterate your chance of finding a hiding place before your stamina evaporates. In itself, I found this to be completely vexing, but it's even worse when I consider that it's inconsistent in how it happens. It's probably why I just tried to dive into a hiding spot as soon as possible. Plus, those bathroom stalls are really helpful since they ironically prevent you from getting caught with your pants down. I say this because the game doesn't pause while you're checking the map, your notes, or even your inventory. Really, it just doesn't pause unless you're poking around the options menu. Anyways, the reason I've focused so much on these mechanics specifically is because it really does wind up defining the vast crux of my journey. There's objectives that you'll end up hunting down to progress the game, but for the most part, these boil down to interacting with objects in a room and then following a clue onwards to the next location. And a large number of those are marked on the map. In fact, there's only a few puzzles or bits of guesswork in the entire game, so the only real reason I had to blindly wander around the map was for the sake of lore or loot. And given you only have 6 inventory slots, rapidly devoting time and potentially resources to acquire more resources you can't actually carry strikes me as a generally inefficient use of your time. Like, I lost count of the number of times I just sat there wasting water bottles or status clearing items because they wound up taking up space in my inventory. And really, it was only near the end of the game that I found the status effects cropping up frequently enough to feel obliged to carry at least 1 or 2 slots devoted to cleansing them. Honestly, it made me pretty grateful that the game at least kept a separate inventory for key items, where I probably would have started screaming inside and never stopped. But you know what? Enough about the mechanics. Let's move on to the visuals here, and I will say the Coma Recut doesn't look half bad. The overall area design is neat, and the school does change up a bit as you progress, growing increasingly eldritch and unsettling. What's more, there's some genuinely solid portraits for the various characters in the game, and some tasty imagery for those who enjoy spooky things. That said, the visual element I was most fond of was the way the killer's design and animations changed over the course of your journey, as she just gradually mutates. It definitely kept the source of my annihilation fresh. That said, protagonist totally has a dorky walking animation though, plus look at that dude's pants. All said, I also really enjoyed the audio elements in this as well. They're just plain solid, with some great musical tracks to help set up the overall atmosphere, and an excellent assortment of sound effects, with the most iconic and noteworthy being those heel clicks, which, yeah, served at once to inspire dread, but also to inform my choices moving forward. The fact that I could actually track the killer's location this way, and that I'd wind up breathing sighs of relief when I could hear nothing, or found myself second-guessing the sound of my own footsteps, that's good. That's really good. Still, having said all this, some of you folks might be wondering what my feelings are on the Coma Recut. Well, I can certainly say I appreciated the idea of it. The overall narrative felt interesting. There was clearly a lot of effort put into fleshing out the story, but the manner the Coma chose to handle delivery of that plot felt questionable at times. I hated the way the protagonist remained completely oblivious to the notes, even when they effectively foretold his impending doom. Plus, even days after, I still found myself frustrated with how finicky the game's true ending was, in part due to the esoteric practices needed to unveil it. Steps which I apparently followed, according to hints given after the game, and yet I'm still unsure of how I friggin' missed it, and thus have no intention of trying to figure it out. And you know, speaking of things that galled me, I'm at a complete loss, even now, for figuring out just how much of my game time was spent hiding out in lockers or bathroom stalls waiting. Because sometimes the stalker would just relentlessly patrol near me, or her teleportation shenanigans when I tried to escape, and it got to the point where I decided the risk of saving while being chased was worthwhile just to discover if I'd lose my pursuer when I died and reloaded. Spoilers, that works! That said, I also discovered that she'll spawn near certain save points and patrol endlessly, which, yeah, I wasn't really a fan of that. While the aesthetic elements of this game are by and large a win for me, especially since I found my stress level skyrocketed from heel clicks, that may also be reflective of the clunk, unfairness, and monotony that fed that dread. Ultimately, while I can certainly justify having played through it, I was left with absolutely no desire to run through it for the true ending once my save file was pooched. All of this is why I warrant the game as a fumble, because while it wasn't a bad stealth game, I'd be very hard-pressed to recommend this to someone who wasn't searching for a stealth/horror game and who didn't have a high threshold for irritation. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And if you have an interest in supporting my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know there's a new release. There's also a Discord, link in the description so you can be part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. That said, I'll catch you folks on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then.